It's the Real News, and I'm Sharmini Pires coming to you from Baltimore. On April 4th, the U.S. House Select Committee on the Climate Crisis held its first public hearing, created by the Democratic Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, and led by Representative Castro, a Democrat from Florida. The committee, from its inception, was a compromise and a struggle. The compromise came about after the youth-led Sunrise Movement demanded that there be a House committee on the Green New Deal, with a focus on implementing the deal while creating green jobs. At the first hearing of the committee, the Sunrise Movement had not been given an opportunity to present. A new two-part print series published by the Real News Network examines the dynamic that took place between those pushing for a Green New Deal and the Select Committee. And here to talk about all of this with us today is Steve Horn. Steve is co-author of the series with Darna Noor, both in our Climate Crisis Bureau, which is a brand new bureau here at the Real News Network. We've been covering climate for a very long time, but for the first time, we have a bureau that has the opportunity to dig deeper into some of the issues we are exploring. So thank you for joining us, Steve.
Good to be here.
All right, Steve, let's start off with what's at stake here. Now, the Sunrise Movement, who is pushing through the Green New Deal, this whole movement is represented in the House by progressive left Democrats like Ocasio-Cortez and others. And then you have the committee appointed by Pelosi, largely establishment Democrats. So what's at stake for each of them?
Yeah, well, I think at the end of the day, I think that the microcosm of what happened at the first hearing is sort of the microcosm of the debate itself that you outlined. That is, this was a creation not of the Sunrise Movement wing or the AOC wing of the Democratic Party, but of the Nancy Pelosi wing of the party. And I think that the Nancy Pelosi wing hopes that this particular forum serves as a way to channel the debate in a way that they would like it to take place. And what remains to be seen is whether or not a Green New Deal can be discussed in this forum or whether it will just be discussed somewhere else altogether. I think that they hope that something like a Green New Deal is not discussed in this particular forum, would be my guess.
Now there was some dispute. If the New Green Deal folks and the Sunrise Movement had their way, they would probably have Ocasio-Cortez as the chair of this committee, but they got Castro. And tell us about her and what she represents in terms of the committee and those who are behind this committee.
Yeah, I think the most important thing to look at for Castro is not her, but who she hired to run the committee itself. And that is, we'll tackle more in part two, but that is to say, the most important person that she hired is the head of the staff for that committee. And that is a woman who was formerly a lobbyist for the Natural Resources Defense Council, which is, or NRDC, which is more part of the kind of more establishment wing of the environmental movement, commonly known as Big Green. And so those kind of organizations have been less willing to get behind something like a Green New Deal, whereas kind of insurgent groups like Sunrise are very much in favor of a Green New Deal and have really moved the climate justice conversation in the United States in a more progressive direction in the past several months.
All right, Stephen, further, you found it interesting that the committee in its first hearing invited a youth plaintiff in the federal case, Juliana versus United States, which was a lawsuit filed in 2015 by 21 youth who alleged that the federal government's inaction on climate change threatens their constitutional right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, the committee invited them as opposed to the Sunrise Movement, but it is a feather in their cap that they did invite this young, youthful, and robust group of people who want to challenge the establishment. So that's a good thing. Let's listen to some of the hearing where they make their case.
Like youth who have come before us in the civil rights movement and other social justice movements, it is often the young among us that shine the light on systems of injustice. So in 2015, 21 young people, myself included, filed a lawsuit against the United States and agencies of the executive branch to safeguard our constitutional right to a stable climate.
All right, Steve, clearly the Sunrise Movement wasn't there, but these young people who were bringing about the case was. So what did the people on the Hill, particularly those staffers associated with this committee, tell you about why the Sunrise Movement isn't central to this committee and the work of the committee?
Yeah, they didn't quite go so far to say that they weren't central to this committee itself. What they did say is they've been in communication with Sunrise more generally over the past weeks or months. They did not have an answer. They did not respond to why they were not invited to this particular hearing, which was completely focused on youth climate activism. And on top of that, the Sunrise Movement told us they were not invited, so it's confirmed they weren't invited, and they did not have any further comment beyond that they weren't invited.
Okay, so Steve, in terms of your investigation into this series, what is the crux of the issue here? Why are they trying to sideline this new robust movement?
I think the ambition of the Green New Deal is pretty radical and challenges the environmental establishment, in a kind of a mainstream forum for the first time in a major way. And I think that they kind of hope that the Select Committee will be a way in which they can sort of channel the energy in a more cautious direction towards more piecemeal reform. What I think will be interesting to see is how Sunrise, if at all, engages with the Select Committee. And I will say that what I found interesting about hearing number one is Sunrise did not comment on the content of that particular hearing, and did not, so it's really not clear what they thought about it yet. But it'll be interesting if they're invited at all, and if they will even engage in that forum, or if they will continue forward with their activism through other channels going forward.
And finally, Steve, what is the role of the Republicans in this committee? What do they want?
Well, I think what the Republicans want, at least through ranking member Garrett Graves, is a discussion that touches on climate change in a way that they're comfortable with talking about climate change. There aren't too many Republicans on this particular Select Committee who are climate change deniers, although that has crept up already. But Graves is not a climate change denier, and what he and other Republicans are pushing at the first rules meeting was including rules that would mandate that in the final report that they produce, there are accountability measures that will include things like jobs or potential job losses from whatever plan they put forward, or accountability on how much this will actually mitigate climate change, looking at things like greenhouse gas emissions. So that's been their main push so far. There's been a lot of hesitance to move in that direction by the Democrats, and all of those amendments proposed by the Republicans at the first business meeting were shot down. So I think the Republicans will have sort of a skeptical look at this Climate Crisis Committee going forward, but it'll be interesting to see whether or not more climate change denial creeps in, or whether it will just be along the lines of questioning accountability measures for whatever plan they put forward.
And that was Steve Horn, a producer with the Real News Network's Climate Crisis Bureau, talking about a new two-part print series published on the Real News Network, which examines the dynamics between those who are pushing for a Green New Deal and the Select Committee, which is a fairly establishment committee that has been there in various forms in the past. Steve, looking forward to reading the rest of your series, and thank you for coming on and talking about it.
Good to talk about it. Thanks for having me.
And thank you for joining us here on the Real News Network.